Last week, we discussed misnomers. This week, we will dive into some outside perceptions of agriculture compared to everyday reality. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. He is my co-host and father, Brandon. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. While you're at it, check out our social media at the Facebook, Instagram, Rumble, and Twitter handles below. For those returning, thank you for coming back. And now to today's topic, which relates well to last week's episode on agricultural misnomers. Whether from Hollywood or personal observations, there is often a gap between outside perception of agriculture and the reality of what is happening. Today, I have 8 topics I would like to address and discuss with Dad. But first, I'd like to get his initial thoughts and comments on some of the things he has heard or discussed with people and how they may or may not actually relate to the reality of ranching and farming. So go ahead, Dad.
I mean, thanks for just tossing me a giant ball there that, I guess one of the things that I've had people tell me is they'll say, "Oh, I've always wanted to do that." And I had a supervisor, great guy, and he was from Illinois, and got to know him. Just a solid guy, really good guy. And he said, "Man, I always wanted to do what you do." And he says, "I have watched you for the last 2 years, what you do." He says, "Man, I don't want to do that," because I was doing that job and the ranch at the same time. He goes, "You work way too much, way too hard. You just work. That's all you do." He says, "I like to have fun. I want to drink beer, ride motorcycles, go spend
boating.
time with friends,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a solitary life in a way, is one thing. But yeah, we work a lot. That's the priority. We don't have a chance to get out. And some of that's probably our own fault, because there are times when you could take some time off, and we do. I don't want to give that impression that we don't, but it's not like every week, like you get 2 days off. You don't. I think people tend to look at something from the viewpoint of how they live. And
Right.
There's plenty of people out there that are working, a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 jobs and working 7 days a week. There's plenty of that. I know there is. I was part of that. And so was your mother. You've done that. I think your brother's done that. So yeah, Mr. Cranky Pants in college, right? When he was working how many jobs and going to school?
About 2. Yeah.
But it was like working at night. I mean, he was putting in a lot of time. We've all done that. So, I think one of the things that is a kind of it's a really a portrayal, I guess, is that, "Oh, we're up when the rooster crows, or the rooster crows," and like, no, we're up a lot earlier than that a lot of times, So, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes you get up when you get up, because you have to. And wintertime, of course, it's before daylight starts, but summertime, at daylight, when it gets, the ball of fire in the sky comes up pretty early and you're up watching it, that's reality. I mean, you got things to do. Sometimes in an afternoon when it's hot, then you don't work.
Right.
Most normal people, we tend to fence then, because there's
or if
a good chance to do something.
we find maybe small things that we can do in the shop, we're maximizing time, because it's okay, we can't work the animals, so we can at least do something to make it productive.
Yeah. And when I say work, it's in the cool, it means with animals, with the cows, horses. And a lot of times, when I'm training a horse, I'm trying to work them early. When it's cool, they're much more amicable to that, because they're not cranky. They don't want to work when it's hot. So you tend to not do that as much. As the training goes on, then yeah, you'll get on them whenever and ride. Maybe not ride them hard because it's hot. I mean, we're talking 95 plus. That's pretty warm for us. And so daylight till dark when you work. Yeah, sometimes you do. In the summertime, there's plenty of times that you're quitting because you can't see anymore. And so depending on the job, and that again is reality, but it's not like you're standing in an assembly line doing the same thing, hour after hour, all during the day. Even a larger project, say like fencing, say you're putting up a quarter mile of fence in a stretch, or, you got a whole fence line to do, but you're doing it from brace post to brace post. It's you're doing a task but there's a lot of different steps to that. So it isn't repetitive either, in that short sense. But then what we do year to year is the same old thing.
Right.
we're seasonal and we're doing lots of stuff. So it's not like I think most people think is a job where you're doing the same thing. You're doing a lot of different things, but you're doing them a lot of hours, and then seasonally different things. Because I had a brother of your friend. He got a hold of me last winter, and it was cold. And he said, "Hey, I'm looking for some work. Can we do some fencing?" Because I'd had him do fencing before, help us out. And I'm like, "It's kind of the wrong time of year, bud. I mean, you're not going to drive a post in this ground.
Yeah.
It's froze hard.
Yeah.
No, you just don't do that."
No,
I
that's a great
have
point.
fenced. Yeah, I've done that in December. Believe me, when that ground wasn't froze, we was out there putting some posts in and putting some wire up, because we could. And it was one of those times where we're done working cattle for, really the majority of the calves are sold. We're just feeding cows. And it was warm enough to do that for a stretch. And there was a lot of people. It was funny because everybody saw little small projects of fencing they needed to get done, and they jumped on it. Yeah.
Yep.
So not often you do that in December.
No, you bring up a really good point though that I didn't add to the list, which is I think it's like that nostalgia or that desire to potentially be in agriculture because people see it as very peaceful. But in terms of like what you're talking about, it is peaceful, but there's a lot of work that goes into it, and you don't get to go mess around like that guy was talking about. And for example, you're talking about cattle specifically and the horses. If people think about it, they have to feed and water their pets every single day. Imagine doing that. They're not their pets, but you have to do that every single day for 100 head of animals every single day. Like that, people don't realize, okay, 2 animals, if it's a cat and a dog or a couple dogs, oh, it's just a couple minutes. But when you're looking at that quantity of livestock and those animals, and it's the same concept, just with bigger tools and bigger food, really. It takes a lot longer than just a couple of minutes to go out and feed them.
Right. And the water dish is a lot bigger,
Right.
and there's more of them, so, and honestly, there's some real potential to lose animals. Because if you lose a pump in a well, and say that's how your water source is for that tank, and it's hot, those cattle are dead in a couple of days if you don't do something.
Right.
So the stakes are pretty high. Usually a pet, if you're home, they're with you. They're following you everywhere. So you're kind of noticing when they're ailing a little bit. But his observation was interesting to me, because he said, "Man," and I've heard that so many times, "Oh, I wish I could do what you do. I'd love to have a farm or a ranch." And like, yeah, okay, yeah, and you're thinking to yourself, you don't have any idea, what you're really asking for. And he was the first one really to admit it. He goes, because he could see that it wasn't from just a notion. It was, he watched and he observed, how I would come to work and I'm tired, or I'm tired getting off work, and I got to go, work for another 3, 4, or 5 hours just to get animals fed, get to them and get them fed, and get home and try to get some sleep, go back to work, because I worked shift work for almost 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And
that's, shift work is tough in the base case.
Right. Absolutely. I am going to move on though to another thing. And like I said, I've got 8 topics, but I think that was a good one to kind of start off with, that outside perspective and then the reality. And the next one I've got is the perspective of having nice new equipment. And people are always saying, "Oh, they got brand new equipment." Well, the reality might be they're just barely holding on, and we got something that's 50 years old, and we're scrapping parts and making it into a walking Frankenstein monster to try and make it get through this season and that season. And when we do get nice equipment, typically it's because we saved up or we had to really put our necks out there to try and actually get the equipment necessary just to keep things running. So I just want to throw that out there and see what you had for thoughts.
Yeah. Here, I don't know, 3 years ago or so, we bought a new tractor.
New to us.
New to us. It was, what was that? 2019, 2018?
Longer than that, but yeah, something.
Yeah. Like that. Anyway, 2018, I think it was the end of the year, and that tractor was at that point 24 years old. You know what I mean? So, well, that's not true. 14 years old. It was a 2003 model.
Okay.
So, 16, 15 years old. And it looked, it was in good shape. It looks nice, good paint. And they did some work on it. And I had a new bucket and grapple put on it because it didn't come with one. So everything looks bright and shiny and it looks brand new. And it's not. It's got some problems with it, but it's problems that we can live with for a while. Got a good sound engine, and everything works, and it's bigger four-wheel drive or front wheel assist, and so it looks like it might be new, but it's not. It was somebody else's wore out junk,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
you know, uh, so there's that. The newest pickup we got is 21 years old now. So that's something to be said there. You try to take care of it. That's the thing. You don't neglect it. And sometimes you feel like you do. And something goes wrong, you're like, God dang it. I should have saw that. Or, well, now it's about time. And you look back and you go, okay, 21 years old. I put a few repairs into this pickup. And you know what? It's got 200 and some thousand miles on it. It really doesn't owe us much,
Right.
and so, but you take care of it. And, um, we were talking about doing things and having fun. And your mom and I bought a pretty nice camper trailer with a big slide out. And it's like, whoa, this thing is pretty nice. And promptly used that thing way less than we were talking ourselves into to justify buying it.
Well, it ended up
And
becoming like a guest quarters, really.
it did. That's really what we used it for more, as people would come and say, hey, you can stay in the house or you can stay in this camper. And it's a nice camper. That way you kind of got your own space. And they'd like, oh, okay. And a lot of
Yeah.
times they'd stay in the camper. They were fine with that. So it did serve a good purpose for us. But and then we decided, you know what, let's sell it. We're just not using it. And it's stupid to do this. While it's, in some good shape and got some less years on it, because that's what people look at. And we took everything out of it, cleaned it all up. Your mother put it on, I think, Craigslist and Facebook. And one of my cousins had a kind of a thread going, or as a thread, right? To somebody, and said, hey, you
Sure.
might want
Yeah.
to look at this, whatever it is, where they're talking back and forth, and says, hey, you want to look at this? He really takes care of his stuff. Like, well, that's good to know, that,
Yeah.
and it did. It sold fairly fast, and it was, they were thrilled because they couldn't believe the shape it was in.
Right.
So you try to take care of stuff, and it reflects like that, and it looks like, hey, things are a lot newer than they really are.
Well, and I think the one piece of equipment that I've seen that you bought, there's two pieces. I take that back. Two pieces of equipment that you've bought new since I've been around. Because I think the swather you guys bought brand new, didn't you? Back in
No,
the No, that was still used.
no, that
Okay.
was used.
Well, and
Yep.
that thing that one, by the time it was sold, it was like 60 years old as well. So like explaining,
Yeah, horses were dragging it.
yeah, explaining how the equipment really lasts. But then, like I said, the two things that I think I have personally seen that are brand new that have been on the ranch for a couple of years now are the hydro bed, and that thing has been used time and time again for multiple purposes: driving post holes, feeding the animals. Now it's got the jerry rigged square bale feeder on it. It's got all the stuff that we use constantly year round for different things. And that has been on 2 or 3 different pickup beds. So once it was brand new, it got broken in, and now it's going from bed to bed to bed. And then the other thing is the side by side, which you more or less got for the comfort of mom, really, and to be able to,
Mom and the
but
pug.
right, but it's helped out with a lot of other things in terms of carrying around some mineral and feed, and it's more economical to use, and
Yeah.
then just being able to use it as the bait car, so to speak, when we're pulling cows in. But yeah,
Well,
those are really the two brand new things, and those are even costly themselves.
they're called. Oh, yeah, it was the price of a very inexpensive, um, no frills pickup
Right,
before pickups went up. You're looking at $15,000-$16,000 for this. And I'm like, no, I was not for getting this thing.
right,
And then we did. And because your mother was saying, you think about what we can do with this, and it's going to use less fuel. And, in the long term, over time, she's right. When you're using basically a Ford 1-ton pickup with a 460 engine in it, which are notorious gas hogs,
Right.
but they got a lot of power. And that's, what the trade-off is there. So if 460, when you're talking that, you're not talking liters anymore. You're talking, this thing is a 1994 model. So, it's old, but it works. And the difference in the fuel mileage between the two and the handiness and there's no comparison. And I think we've probably saved at least half of the cost of that side by side already in, 3-4 years that
Right.
we've had it. So yeah, we had it. It was brand new. We got a 4-wheeler, which I was totally against. And
That's been useful as well.
that's been very useful. It has. It's handy. It's a really good little initial firefighting thing. Weed sprayer. I mean, there's a multitude of uses for that as well. That has been good, and neither one of those have cost us much money at all to put any pieces and parts into. You buy a quality, really good, proven name brand that is a little more expensive. That color is red, and it lasts, and it's well worth it.
Yeah. The big point though being equipment is very rarely nice and brand new.
Yeah.
It's normally barely holding on, but the small things that we do get are new. They're somewhat affordable, and there's a very good purpose behind it, and it ends up we try to maximize it as best we can, and that's the reality of equipment when you see it on a ranch, and I would assume probably a farm as well for most people.
Oh yeah.
The next point,
some people have a good deal though where they lease their vehicles. And and can turn them over every 2 years. There's a tax advantage to that for them. I just don't want to have that payment. That's a perpetual payment on something.
Right.
But if you have a tax advantage, it probably works out for you. And I just have a hard time doing that because we put a lot of miles on vehicles too.
Right.
A lot of miles.
Yeah. Financially, it just doesn't make sense for us.
Right.
The next point is ranch crews versus family. So a lot of this stuff, I tend to see things where people are like, oh, you got a crew of cowboys working and they got, horses. We've actually had some people call and they said, oh, it's Hashknife Ranch. I can do maybe some, I'm looking to do some day work and stuff like that. And nothing against those guys, nothing at all. They're just,
I do the same thing. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not the case for a lot of the things, especially like with us. We've talked about the size of the ranch in terms of acreage and herd sizes, and it's just not feasible to have a ranch crew. Sometimes if you're on a big ranch where you've got literally hundreds of miles, like the Quad 6 ranch in Texas, they need multiple crews. But for the 90% of the ranches and farms in the United States, I would probably push you towards they are family owned and operated, and there's not very many outsiders working because one, they can't afford it, and two, it just makes more sense to work with typically the people you trust. Now, family you can't always trust, obviously, that depends on your situation, but for us, it's the people we trust. We know that they're going to take care of the animals the way we want them taken care of and do things the way we want them to be taken care of.
Well, it's a financial thing too. I mean, you can't afford to pay somebody really, really well when you're not taking any wage yourself.
Right.
I mean, so you tend to work for nothing. We joke that I've got a really good deal, or I got a half-wit that works for nothing, and that would be me. So we make do with what we can because that's the way most family ranches are. They're just big enough for people to be there. And if you're lucky enough to have somebody where you're living on the place, all of you, that's fortunate. It's really fortunate. But again, you have to have the larger volume of acreage and animals to be able to do that. And it's cheaper than hiring a hired man and or the family, because a lot of times you do that. You provide housing in some places and feed them half a beef a year, whatever the arrangement is, and a wage every month. And oftentimes they're looking for a wife if they don't have one. and she's got to be happy there. And if they got kids, they're going to be in a school system. So, it's not easy to keep people as well. And unfortunately, people who work in agriculture as a wage earner are generally tending to drift around a little bit because they're chasing some money because they have to, because nobody pays well. They can't afford to pay well. It's unfortunate, because what a great life for somebody to live in if you're their kid. You get all the advantages with not knowing
responsibility.
none of the responsibility. Yeah.
Now, I think that ties well into the next one, which is people often think of a ranch, and I'm going to talk ranching specifically for this, because you say, oh, you must have a quote large spread, and to some people a large spread might be really it could be 20 acres, which to us that means nothing.
That's nothing.
It could be what we have, which is the reality for us, a couple hundred acres, which is about 700, right? Or
a little over that, a little over. We got over a section and a half, or almost, but we got a lot of leased ground, and there's a lot of people that do that. They have a lot of leased ground,
and that's the point. Is it's depending on how you define it. Is it incorporating leasing ground, or is it what you actually own? But then the other thing too is a lot. I think where the misnomer and the misunderstanding might come from, and with that perception from the outside, is that a large spread is multiple sections. Again, I'll reiterate, a section is a square mile, and they're thinking of large famed ranches like, again, the Quad Six in Texas, maybe the what was it, the XIT,
the King Ranch,
and you're thinking literally hundreds of square miles of land, and that would be a large spread, when in reality it is only a few hundred acres, maybe a section or two. It's not very big. It's very manageable for what we just talked about, the family crew versus a large ranch crew.
Well, and television has done a lot for that too. And in movies, the Ponderosa on Bonanza. I mean, I don't know how many acres those guys had. Holy cow! If you're looking at the television show, they had some people working there, but those guys didn't seem to do a lot of work. They did a lot of playing here and there. Always had some kind of drama going on. Yeah, exactly. In a way, it was, without all the whiskey drinking.
The next part is, I think this is it's kind of cool, actually. The idea that everything is brand new. We've kind of already talked about that with equipment, but specifically looking at buildings, there may be upgrades or brand new buildings being erected and created that are used. And that does happen. However, a lot of it's the old buildings that have just, they've stayed alive, taken care of them, or it is in fact an old building and it's just got new siding because it needed to be replaced. But more importantly, I think the reality is more and more, and people are actually, I think in a sense, they're putting more and more effort towards maintaining this, but that's remnants of old homesteads. The country was held together by old grungy stuff that looks like it's falling apart today, but it's also, there's definitely it's a very unique situation, because some people are like, listen, it's just too dangerous, we got to nix it. But then some people are also trying to hold on to it for as long as possible. And what you'll see, the reality is, it's old buildings, stuff barely holding on, homesteads that are possibly falling over, and new buildings are just really not in the deck of cards when it comes to ranching.
Well, and there's a lot of different things that go along with that. You're right. When I was a kid, there was lots of just sheds and stuff on places, and they were fairly small, and they were little storage sheds is what they turned out to be, or what they were being used for. Some of them might be a house, a small shack that was lived in, homesteaded in, if they had lucky enough means to put up something that was, wood structure, and a lot of times tar paper on the outside. You'd see a lot of tar paper shacks when I was a kid, but everybody kind of viewed them as, if they didn't have a purpose like that, they're just junk, and they were just either left to fall in, or they might get a wild hair and burn them,
which
just get rid of them. We did that with a barn that we had that was old and wasn't that safe anymore. just, burned it down. And it was right next to the corrals. And that's when we started putting in pipe corrals. Your uncle started doing that, but yeah, that's something that's different now too, because a lot of things are made out of steel.
Right.
You've got a wood frame, wood post, and it has been that way for the last 40, 50 years. But you'd see a few new buildings going up, and man, that was a new steel building. Well, it's a pole barn with, wood siding or a steel siding and a steel roof. But now that's just common. I mean, that's when you put something up, it's economical, large footprint where you can really put a lot of stuff in for probably the minimum cost. And yeah, they're, pretty resilient. You're not painting them. You're not, putting linseed oil on the outside of them to preserve them, or, keep them from rotting. It's a pretty nice way to go. So it's just a change with the times. And if you've got a couple old shacks where that needs to go, you got to clear that out.
Yeah.
And you see that.
And I think the other thing too is I really want to hit the homestead part, because especially in Montana where we're at, you'll go down the highway and you'll see a lot of old homesteads that they're grayed out, they're falling apart. And I think some people purposely leave them as a reminder of like our heritage and where we started in settling the ground. But then the other thing too is they got other stuff. Like there's more important things to do than to sit there and take care of this old dilapidated building that needs to just fall over, or like you said, burn.
Well, there's a good example of that. Just to the east of us is a house, small house. You got to call it a house, but it's completely made out of sandstone and mortar put together. And it's, part of it's fallen in, but that was an old homestead. I mean, it was something in its day. I mean, a lot of work went into that, but the whole thing is rock, it's stone, and pretty neat. Neighbor down, on the river, they've been there forever. I mean, forever. His grandmother was the first woman sheriff in the state. He was her husband was a sheriff and got killed. And she took his finished his term as sheriff. They appointed her, and she did a fine job. They've got a big old stone barn, long and narrow. I mean, and I haven't been in it in years, but really neat. It was cool in the summertime. You walk into the walls are thick. And I know several years ago it was starting to fall in. Well, they had somebody, I think the grandson has got the place now, and he put that wall back up, and you see it's patched in. But I think that's pretty cool. And I think that goes to what you're saying is it's still usable, repairable, but there's some nostalgia there that you don't want that to go away. And there's a number of buildings on that place that the roofs are falling in. They're old houses or shacks. In fact, as my mother, my grandpa, and grandma worked for them at one point, and lived in that one house right next to the road, and the roof has fallen in on it now, but because they just let it stand because they're very nostalgic that way. Down at east of Billings on Fly Creek, there's a actual sod house put together with sod chunks. You've seen that. We've driven by that, and still standing. Part of it's opening up a little bit, but really freaking cool when you've got sod walls that are cut in squares from some of that deep, rich soil there on that Yellowstone Valley. They could do it. You wouldn't make a sod house here very well, but they have that thing, and it's still standing. I don't know how old that thing is. It's turn of the century for sure. 1900s, but it's still up and pretty cool. Nobody bothers it. Nobody, attempts to even think about doing anything but let it stand and kind of be a reminder of how tough were the people that built that thing and then living in it. And it's got a dirt floor. There's no doubt. Right. I mean, there's no wood floor in that thing. So those are pretty neat things to see.
Now, moving to clothing, people will often think of maybe ranchers having fancy shirts and sparkly buckles and beautiful chaps, maybe even like silver bits for their horses and silver conchos and everything, just laying them out. Whereas the grungy reality is that most of the time they're not wearing nice clothing. It's ripped, it's torn, it's got holes all over. It might be grungy and oily and dirty because they've been wearing it for a week, and they'll shift it, they'll swap out of it in like Saturday and have a new set to wear for the week. I think it's just something to keep in mind as well. People always think of that clean cut look, and you got the stuff to make you look cool, whereas really it's just you're dirty, you're gross, and it's another work uniform, really.
Yeah. There's some real cultural changes or cultural differences there between areas where you live too.
Right.
We're not real wild about having, silver bits, a lot of horsehair braided stuff, inlaid into leather. I mean, it looks nice. Yeah. But it's not very utilitarian.
Right.
But if you go to, the Southwest, kind of some of that buckaroo culture, they've got spurs of, silver on them, big rowels. It's just kind of the style, the old, from the old vaquero style. But it depends on how much money you got. I've seen a lot of young kids, they'd spend their whole month's wages, what was left over, and buy something fancy like that. And that was what they did. And to me, it was like, oh God, what a waste of money, because what are you using it for? You're doing exactly the same thing with something that's very utilitarian. And if it gets broke or tore up, yeah, you hate that because you can't afford it. But at least I didn't spend 4 or 5 times what, I could be using something for. And now it's gone just the same. So there's a lot of cultural differences there, tons of cultural differences. We just tend to not be quite like that. Rodeo has influenced that quite a bit, I think, too, when you're talking about, fancy chaps and stuff. Yeah, that's, those guys they're kind of peacocks, especially the bull riders with the, a lot of glittery fringe on really brightly colored chaps, things like that. But it's a sport, and they're going along with the bling of the sport.
Well, and
where
what's interesting,
you're not really.
What's interesting too about that bling that you're talking about is anymore. There was one rider, I don't remember his name. I think it was Whitehead, maybe. He was sponsored by it might have been Monster Energy or something like that, and he had all blue. What he did was he was one of the first people to do all blue, because it was like that was the business's color and
Right.
Stuff like that. And so
he was a stock car is what he was doing. He's slapping their stuff on his stock car.
That's exactly what happened. And after that, people go, oh, we could use our chaps as that too, because that's what he did. And he didn't. What he did, I think he had like a simple emblem on each leg, like upper thigh, and then the frills and everything were like blue to match his blue shirt that he would always wear. And those guys have always worn shirts that had emblems on them like they do. But he kind of opened up the fact that, oh, we could use our chaps to do it. And so now guys like JB Mooney, who's a very famous multi-world bull riding champion. Yeah. And he's one of the toughest dudes in the world. He specifically is for sure sponsored by Monster Energy drink, and everything he has on him is green and yellow to match Monster Energy, and it has it all down his chaps. It's got it on the frills, it's got it on his shirt, it's got it on his vest. I mean, that's where some of that stuff comes out. It's like, they are peacocking, but at the same time, it's a business deal, because they're a
billboard. Yeah.
The more he can show that, the more money he can bring in for his family through that sponsorship.
Well, and we'll probably talk about sponsorship someday and my brush with that. It's a moneymaker for you, or it's at least an expense cushion where you're not paying to do things, or somebody else is paying it for you, but that's the trade-off. So there's a lot of things that we do. You get you're always wearing your bluest pair of pants. You get some wore out, and you kind of save those for
a nice good occasion,
funerals, and I mean, that's what you do. You kind of rotate your clothes, and they get tore up. I tend to take the elbows out of my shirts, and I just probably too much bicep curls because that's the way I am. But
with those 12-ounce beer curls.
Okay. Oh yeah, there it is. I like the pints myself. Thank you very much. But So yeah, you're right. I mean, hey, I'm guilty of that. I think the shirt I wore it yesterday, but I'm going to be, I'm calving, starting to calve right now, and we were working on some stuff in the shop yesterday. The wind was howling, so I was telling your mother, I said, man, I hope these cows lay down and they're not facing east when they try to calve, because that wind's just going to push them right back in. It was tough. It was a lot of wind. So I'm doing stuff, and I know I'm going to get grungy today because I'm going to do some more shop work. And so I'm not going to go through, I don't smell. And
Right.
so, and right now I'm here by myself. I'm at the ranch by myself. So
it didn't
even
even
if I
matter if you
did,
smelled.
exactly. Yeah. So that's, you just wear what you got. And the biggest thing for me is boots.
Yeah.
I buy a quality pair of boots, and a quality now. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, you could buy a very good quality pair of boots for about $75. And those were high quality, good dress boot. Even your working boots were a little bit less than that. But now, to get a decent pair, a good pair of boots, you're in a $400 range. And I go through boots. I'm hard on boots. I'm doing a lot of riding. That's all I do is I wear a pair of boots, or I got another one the soles are out of. You can't repair them anymore. The saddle maker I used to repair the boots, he's like, oh man, he says, this is the last one. We're not going to get any more out of this. He hand stitched it. He didn't even use his
sewing machine.
He said it was, yeah, he didn't use his sewing machine. He said, that's a good thing. He says, I got a pair just like him, and I want to get one more use out of them. And he said, so if I looked at him, they sat there for almost a year. I thought he'd thrown them away. And he called me one day. He goes, hey, I got your boots down. I was like, I'd already bought another pair by then because I figured he just tossed them, because that was kind of the deal. I'll do something with him if you can. And if you can't, that's that. There's nothing you can do. You can't wish them together. And so he called me and said they were done, but it inspired him to do something a little bit different. And he hand stitched those guys. And it's like, Jesus, Wes, you don't charge enough for this. For everybody else, it charges plenty for me. But you use your boots. How many pairs of shoes does a woman have? I mean, it's kind of a joke, really,
Depends on
but
the woman.
yeah, it depends on. Even there's a lot of guys that have a lot of tennis shoes or a lot of shoes, and I've got 2 pair of boots. I've got a pair that I use. I got them permanently stuck in a pair of overshoes because those soles that he repaired by hand finally come apart. So they're inside of a pair of overshoes where I don't have to have that sole. It holds them together, and I use them in the wintertime. And I'm going to wear those things. I'm going to wear out a bunch of overshoes using them. Why not? It takes wear and tear off of a pair of boots that I don't need to do that with, or wear and dry ground. But those boots then take wear and tear. You're doing everything in them, everything. So they're not fancy when you put them on. When you leave the store with them, they are. But after that,
Right.
they kind of, it's like having the first scratch in the bed of a brand new pickup.
Yep.
Like,
okay.
Yeah, now it's done. Let's go ahead and let's live life from here.
Along with I kind of started with cowboy clothing and kind of that fancy stuff. It also relates to everyone's a cowboy. That's the perception from the outside, especially when it comes to ranching. And that's not the case. We have said multiple times, we are not cowboys. We prefer to be considered ranchers or cattlemen. There's
Horseman,
there's a definite negative connotation to cowboy, but we understand also where people get that from. It's part of a cultural thing. So again, perception is everybody's a cowboy versus what I said in reality. Nope. Because, again, you're thinking of shows like Bonanza, maybe even Gunsmoke. And then recently things like Yellowstone, everybody's a freaking cowboy. And that's just not the case. There are plenty of ranchers out there that, believe it or not, they hate horses and they will never touch a horse if they don't have to. And everything they do is via dirt bike, pickup, or 4-wheeler, and that, or just on foot. And if you were to think of it like most people, I think would relate to, a cattle or a sheep herder in maybe the UK, where they're out there dealing with their livestock and then they go back into the house or the barn. That's what they do. that's very much, there's a large portion of ranchers, even in the United States, that do things just like that too. They won't touch a horse. Trust me. They will just deal with the cattle or the hogs, if you have hogs, I guess, and sheep, and that's all they do. And then they go back.
Yeah. And I mean, you contain hogs, but sheep is a good example of that. And my understanding, not that I know a lot about sheep, because I don't, but my understanding is a lot of guys who have a lot of sheep, they don't want you on a horse because you're moving those sheep too fast. You know, they want you on foot.
That makes a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so it depends on what your animals are too, you know. Sheep and cattle can move a lot faster. And some of that on the sheep side of that is they will have herders and they will move those flocks just slowly, and they're grazing that ground and keeping them moving as they go, but keeping them together too. And there's a lot to be with just losing them and predation. And, you know, sheep and they wake up in the morning and they go, okay, how can I die today? You know, I mean, that's what they do. So, you know, it takes a lot of sheep to, you know, and they're profitable when you can do that and run it. And there's some folks here east of us that are well known. I think they were probably here when it was still a territory. I don't think it had gotten statehood yet when they first come in here. And, you know, the family still runs sheep, and they've always ran sheep, and they, you know, they're in the business. There's some leaders in the sheep industry as far as marketing wool products and quality wool and some of the meat products too. I got a lot of respect for them. Don't know them very well, you know, spoken to them, some of the family members, but, you know, with what they're doing and what you see them do, I got a lot of respect for what they do with what they want to do too.
Right. And I think really the big point of this, when you think ranching, you often think cattle and sheep. And when you think cattle and sheep, people often think, you know, going back to settling the West, it was all done with cowboys. And that's just simply not the case anymore. The reality is, we prefer to use horses to keep things more calm. It's also more fun, but there's a reason why we do it with horses, and it's how we've always done it, and we will continue to do it. Do we incorporate the use of, like, for example, our ATV, our side by side on occasion to draw them in? Yeah, absolutely. It's just an efficient way of doing it and trying to get what we need done in a quicker manner, and with all people involved and getting it, again, like I said, it's just efficiency. But that is just simply not the case, when the reality is that a lot of people, they only use ATVs or four-wheelers or pickups, and they won't do anything in regards to horses, which would bring them into that cowboy culture, that cowboy realm.
And your mom can't take her pug with her on a horse,
right?
Otherwise, she would. You know, she's ridden and she's pushed some cows around, but on horseback. But, you know, she does a really good job of getting to the highway when you need to cross a highway, making sure traffic stopped, getting up, opening gates, you know, holding a bunch of cattle in a corner that we're going to take out of a pasture. And then she'll just, you know, go up there and then she'll lead them through like the Pied Piper. She might have a bucket of grain and trying to keep them together, trying to hold them back.
Yeah.
And, you know, she does everything she can. She does a good job at it, you know, so it does serve a purpose. I'm not gathering with those pieces of equipment and trying not to push too hard, but I prefer horseback.
Yeah. And I'm going to write that down, because that's going to be a conversation for
another time
later. Yeah. But also, just a parting shot before we get to the next one. I'm sure she could ride more if you gave her a saddlebag size big enough to hold the pug in the saddle. But anyway, moving on.
I think she'd have to have one of those front end baby carriers so they'd both be happy. Yeah.
Anyway, the next one, I'm actually going to skip ahead real quick to herd size. A lot of people might think, when it comes to ranching, again, thinking like I did with the land size, you know, you got a large spread and stuff like that. They may think of a massive herd full of hundreds or thousands of head cattle, maybe even sheep, like we talked about. Reality is, in ranching, oftentimes it's just double digits, folks. You don't often hit the triple digits. And sometimes when you do, it doesn't get past the 1 mark. There's not that many ranches that have a lot of cattle, but there are many that have double digits, and they float around the 100 head mark at most.
There's a number of large places even here. When I say here in Montana, South Central Montana, particularly, that I know of that have, several thousand head. They've got multiple ranches, big established places. But when you think about how many small operations it takes to, when those guys are throwing in the average, to equal what the average is on a family place, like 20 head. Right. I think that's the national average, right at 20 head. And so, yeah, that tells you how many people have just 20 head or less. And I think they're probably counting some of these folks, like we talked to Moses Woodson,
right,
and his homestead. Some of those, there's a lot of those. They just got maybe a couple head, maybe a milk cow,
right,
or one or two beef critters, and
but keep in mind, he also explained that's the difference between homesteading and ranching. Ranching is more the commercial. We are producing for a set consumer, whereas they are producing for their own consumption.
Yes, that's correct. But I don't know whether some of those animals are lumped into that as being a,
good point.
I mean, that could be, that statistic could be your overlap in your Venn diagram, right?
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. So, but it still takes a lot of them to bring that average down, even if it's not in that. And there's people that have a cow or a horse and call themselves ranchers on, 5 acres.
And respectfully disagree, but I understand why people might think that, right. Again, people think 20 acres might be a large spread, as I said. But that, again, respectfully disagree. Not how we see it, but right. We understand where you might be getting that thought from, and we get it.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. My final point, starting here at this mark, because I gotta always write these things down. There's the portrayal of the lifestyle, and we kind of started with it, so this is a great way to end it. The portrayal of a portrayal and perception, and again, a lot of our content recently has gone back toward Yellowstone, and the reason why is because it is creating a perception of this reality that just does not exist. And that's why we continue to kind of fight back against that and provide that as a springboard to explain things to people. And trust me, I freaking love Yellowstone. I think it's a great show, but there's a lot of stuff that it's created on the outside with that perception that's actually causing harm to the cattle and ranching industry. And that perception is, and this is it right here, that people in the ranching world and the lifestyle and the industry are rich. They're sitting on a porch looking out at mountains or this vast prairie view, and they just live a life of leisure and amazingness. In reality, those very people are working hard nearly every day, like Dad pointed out from the beginning. Sometimes you set up times for a vacation or a quick, escape for a couple of days to, like when I come home on leave, it's oftentimes, hey, we're going to go try this brewery because we haven't been there yet.
Or we haven't seen each other in person that's right.
And so what we'll do is we'll do like a 2-day ring, have somebody watch the animals, just make sure that everybody stays alive. We'll go out.
We've done that once.
But that's my point though. And the reality is working most of the time, and you might have a simple beer at a bonfire out in the back of the pasture or something like that. It's not this grandiose, rich lifestyle that people are portraying on TV. And that's where I kind of want the whole perception versus reality to come in. It's not the case in terms of a ranch, almost like being a monopoly where you've got Standard Oil sitting there with, the finest whiskey and the finest champagne that you could potentially get. It's just, we're simple people trying to make it each day.
There's an underlying tone to Yellowstone too. I think that people probably get a wrong impression from, and that is that people like, was it John Dutton?
Right.
That we're all right in the middle of politics, and we are forming, state statutes and policy. Side deals and policy and politics, right, that we're right deep in the middle of that because you got the money to do it. And that is simply not the case.
Right.
I mean, there are a few people that have been in, like the legislature, some large landowners, particularly early in the statehood, which, I mean, that's what happened. But by and large, there are not that many folks in agriculture that are in politics, and especially in powerful positions in politics.
And if people are in politics, it's oftentimes not. It's not in terms of they have an R or a D behind their name, delineating them by their political affiliation. Rather, it's they are involved with agricultural organizations that are trying to pitch the issues that we are seeing in the agricultural industry and present them in a factual, non-emotional way to politicians, saying, listen, this is what the issues are currently in terms of, for example, the meat packer situation, what's going on, how it's hurting cattle producers, and what it will end up doing to consumers. And those were the very people who went to Washington in June, July of 2021 and presented their circumstances to Congress, which very little has been done since then. But that's my point, is they're very much in those organizations to explain things and to pitch the industry's concerns to the nation.
Well, and yeah, and what's happened is by the time that they feel the need, and let's put it this way, by the time they finally have had enough and have to act on the need that they've seen, it's to basically reverse politics that were supposed to be solved for policy.
Uh-huh.
And, there's the policies is the last thing that politicians want to take care of. It's their particular politics, and it's all about winning no matter what, whether it's good or bad for the people that they are supposed to serve, instead of, I mean, we can do a whole show on those who are in service and those who are served and those who are governed. And a lot of people that tend to be in that want to be a governed type of role, for want of a better word.
Yeah. Dad is starting to freeze up. So I think
The
this is a
reality
good
of it.
time to wrap it up. We'll check his internet before we start doing the next go around. But that was today's perception versus reality. There's a lot of grandiose and new ideas and these things that it appears like the ranching community is full of just stuff, whereas reality, it's oftentimes, you're rubbing pennies together, you're keeping things together while you can, you're living a simple life, and you're working regularly and not just out there drinking and carousing like some of those shows portray. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dad to do his final comments.
Well, when you say rubbing pennies together, you assume they're pennies because they're so thin that the date, the Lincoln is pretty thin on it. So, that's how we get paid, and we will thank you only until you're better paid.